Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining the symposium about archiving performance, which was organized by my lovely colleague Lotte. We just had a nice introduction by the director of MUCA, Bart de Bare, and this means it's time for a first panel discussion. The first panel will be about the position of the artist in bringing live performance art to museum collections and archives without losing the characteristics of the work, of course. So of course we know that the registration in museums can be quite rigid and performance is more dynamic, it's evolving, it's ever-changing, and this can pose some questions, like the question that is the central question of the symposium today, which is how can the poetics of the artist find its way into the archive? So I am today joined by three very nice guests, which are the artists Otobong Nkanga, Agnieszka Sosnowska and Chantal Kleinmeulman, but I think it's better to let them introduce themselves. So I would like to give the floor to Otobong first.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Lotte, Tim Lott, I think, yeah, hi. I was looking for you. Bart, and also the team of MUCA, and of course my colleagues that are here. It's really a pleasure to meet you finally. I hear the names, but I don't know the faces, so it's really great to actually have them here with me. Where do I start? Okay, my name is Otobong Nkanga, a visual artist, performer. I do many things. I'm an artist, yeah. I have so many things going through my head, so I have to kind of reshuffle and arrange it to be able to start my conversation or my talk. So I started with, I did an exhibition here in MUCA in 2015, and that's when they opened the space in situ of the, in MUCA. And I showed about 4 performances which took place on the carpet from where I stand. And every month I would actually make a performance on the carpet, but different performances each time. And over the years of doing performances, I've been thinking a lot about what it means when an artwork enters into a collection, what it means when a piece, how do you actually have this work? How does it enter into a collection? How can you reenact a piece that you've performed at a certain time? So there are many questions that come beyond just the piece itself, but also consider your mood, consider the emotion that you're feeling, consider the political and social and ecological changes that are going on. And the works definitely do evolve over time. And I will take one example of the work called Diaspora. I was invited to do this piece by Hans-Ori Sobrist and Klaus Bissenbach, and that was in 2014. But it first started with earlier works like Taste of a Stone, which was done in Charlottenburg, Kunsthalle Charlottenburg, and later on in the Emirates. And there's been different iteration of the work. And at the end of the day, I decided that I would love to invite other women, and mainly women that can claim that they have a Black heritage. So it doesn't really work around the skin color or the color of your eyes, but it's really coming from the place of heritage. And if you know that your great-great-great-great-grandfather was Black or was from the African continent, you can actually take part in this performance. And so the first time I did it was in Basel. And later on, or maybe I should explain a bit the performance. The first time I did it, was I meant to talk about that or not? Oh, it's okay? All right, because I'm just going, I'm just sliding. But I'll try and go quickly, right? Tell me when to stop. Yes, I'll just go quickly. So anyway, the performance was done in 4 different places, and each time one had to reconsider the people that were performing, reconsider the elements, reconsider. There are so many things to reconsider, and this was one of the pieces that I was interested in putting in as a discussion with Muka. I will not go further because maybe we'll ask questions later, but at least this was one of the pieces that I was really interested in considering how it could enter into a collection and what it meant over time. And I think the last performance that happened in Berlin in 2020, especially with Black Lives Matter during that time, and with many other things that were going on, completely changed the way the piece was performed and how it affected also my own perception of the work. So it might be something to discuss later, because I think that with political shifts, how a work can actually be totally read in a different way. I will pass it on to you.
Hello, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here with you today. My name is Agnieszka Sosnowska, and I'm a curator in Museum Susz in Switzerland, but also assistant professor in the Art Institute of the Polish Academy of Science. So I have this luck to have a bit to join like these two things, to be academic and curator. Maybe I will stand, because I was in fact asked to make a short presentation, a bit to maybe explain what I'm doing here and a bit like take you for a walk of my different struggles with the subject of archiving of performances, which most of the time I took together with artists. So maybe I will just go there and tell you a bit about my past experience and different way, also a bit of playing with this issue of how to grasp the performance. And I decided I will now be discussing what those are projects that I realized, and most of all exhibition, which were realized in Ujazdowski Castle CCA, where I used to work for like over 10 years before it was like taken by right-wing director, and some of us like decided just to leave the institution. So the first exhibition with a performative elements which I did in Ujazdowski was an exhibition of like this amazing Brazilian artist Laura Lima. So maybe some of you know her, who in fact here it was quite easy, because Laura Lima, the way she thinks about the image and performance, in a way it's then quite easy to like grasp this idea of performance, because what she does in fact, she builds situations like exhibitions in which it's like live image, so she adds a live element into an image. So when it comes to issue of how to archive it or how to make a documentation. I have to say it's like one of the easiest cases that I had experienced, because always the way she composed things, they are already, in a way, composed picture. So then the issue of, so they are ready, more or less, for a picture. They are a picture by itself, in a way. So you can see here what Laura Lima does in some of her projects that she really like. Suddenly, in this picture, in the exhibition space, you have like the living bodies. I think in this exhibition we have 16 people for half a year, like performing in the exhibition. So that was like really also very challenging. In general, the issue of when performance enters institution, museum, but not only in a form of like performance which, like those are processes which last half a year, yes, like for 9 hours, 8 hours every day. So this is always like a big challenge, how institutions should also take care of the performers, for example. But this is not the subject of today's meeting, so I will not tell more about it. The other exhibition, choreographic exhibition, again, totally like different story, was the exhibition of, in fact, artists who you may know, because Ula Sikle lives in Brussels. She's like Canadian artist with Polish roots. And with Ula Sikle, she made a solo exhibition, choreographic exhibition in Ujazdowski Castle. And here things get very complicated when it comes to documentation, because this exhibition was all the time in movement. So, you know, what I now show you, I don't know if it tells you anything about this this exhibition. So with Ula, we were struggling a lot It was still discussion, even when the exhibition was on. We were all the time very unhappy with all the photos that came out, and it's. I remember Ula was making even some special photo session. Then we decided that it's photos, they don't work, not at all. So we made a film about the exhibition. Maybe we won't have now time that I show you this, but we were also not satisfied with this film, even though Ula was there with the cameraman, like really trying to bring her perspective and her eye on the exhibition. But it was very, very difficult, and I would say that none of our trials were really successful. There was always something missing. So those were like two exhibitions which were performative, choreographic, and after this experience, I decided to make exhibition about more like a performative turn. When this became a subject for the exhibition by itself, the exhibition was called Other Dances and took on board one of the most significant phenomena of new art in Poland in recent years, the bold experiments by the creator of dance, theater, performance, music and visual arts, which have combined into a phenomenon known as a performative turn. So what we were in fact trying to do is to name a new phenomena which appeared on the Polish art scene. So where are we here? And one of the issues that really we have to confront, as we wanted to present in the exhibition space, also like all this, what happened also in the recent year and what was extremely important in mostly experimental choreography, because I really believe that experimental choreography in recent years was like this extremely important art practice which could communicate so well also with other mediums. So the issue of archiving, documenting, making a collection was like very present in the exhibition, and also how to document, yes, how to register performances, what can be shown in the museum, in the institution, yeah, here you can see like this, you cannot see it very well, but this very long wall we had. And in fact, each of the artworks which are presented here, they represent very different attitude to how we can, what we can do with the registration or with the performance to show it in the museum. So, for example, we'll start from quite like classical registration of the whole performance. On this wall, you had like registration of whole performance, which took like, 40 minutes. Then here, I can show it very, very quickly, maybe.
Stelaż, szkielet.
We also changed performances into video works, so we re-recorded quite many pieces, and in this attempt to so that also from the aesthetic side we can really present them in the exhibition space. So this is example of one of the works which was recorded again in such a way that in fact it can function now, and it functions after this exhibition as a video work. It can be presented in exhibitions. And maybe the most, just to finish, the most radical thing that we did, or I encourage artists to do something like this, and Marta Ziółek agreed.
Audience make me gyal I'ma lose themself. Major laser make me gyal I'ma lose themself.
We've changed performance into a GIF. And it was also recorded again only for the exhibition, and built this archive inside the exhibition. But I think what is important, what happened here was in very close relation with, or in dialogue with the artists. Yeah, we played with it, or really had also fun with it, and tried to really keep this very, very open attitude and free attitude to what documentation, registration can be, and how can it be shown in within the exhibition, and in the way introducing this subject of how we can imagine archive, how institution could collect performances. Apart from this, there was online archive of registrations, which was online. You could just sign in the exhibition space on iPad, and then you were getting a link to the archive of registrations. Yes, so this is what I wanted to share with you, coming from my experience with working with the archives of performances.
My name is Chantal Kleinmeulman. I work at the Abbemuseum, and closely involved with the acquisitions process and making information on the collection available via the websites and texts and publications. And for certain situations, I do research into the collection. And I started more than a decade ago at the Van Abbemuseum doing research on the work of Ian Wilson. I will talk about two artists, and I hope to make it very short. It's on the work of Ian Wilson, who's known for speech as his art form. And the other artist is Frans Elert Walter, who makes canvas objects and hands them to the public with a set of conditions to work and activate the objects and come into a certain awareness. Both artists, the importance is the awareness of the work and not something, not the object with Walter, not something written or. So when I researched Ian Wilson's work, it was the Van Abbemuseum wanted to make a catalogue raisonné, but there was no trace of his work. There's no video, there's no audio tape, there's no photographs even, because that's not what he wants, because it corrupts with the idea of spoken transfer of ideas, concepts. So we took on the challenge to see if it's possible to make an overview of this kind of ephemeral work. And the aim was to make a source book for more information and research on his work. So I assembled a lot of data and circumstances in which his discussions would take place. It would take place at the start very informal, on the street, on walking, at home with people, in the studio with artists, in a cafe, at openings of galleries. Whenever he had an opportunity, he would drop in the word time, and from there a conversation would start. He had very much trouble making people know what he was doing, because you can only speak it, and you cannot meet everyone by just speaking. And the printed word was very difficult for him to accept and take responsibility for, while other concept artists made use of it, and a catalogue could be a exhibition space. For him, it was very difficult to enter into that process of going into the art world. At some point, there were curators like Seth Siegelab and Lucy Lippard, who were sensitive to his ideas and tried to find ways that he could express his work by symposiums and interviews. Those were taped and transcribed and edited and published, and that was very problematic for him still. So at some point, he did sell interviews, but then he retracted as not being his work, and saying it's. I had a discussion with Robert Barry. It is his work, and the version that exists without any recorded form, that is my work. With another collector, he had the agreement of selling the work by means of a certificate, and also having the discussion transcribed. And they did it for many years and had many conversations and continued their discussions. But at some point, Wilson thought this is not right and it should not be kept, even if it's in your archive. And so he asked the collector to destroy it, which he did. And Wilson, threw out the tapes with the garbage. So at one point, the excerpts of these interviews were published, and that referred to his work. And at some points, there came a change in his thought that describing what he did, his way of working, would also be a good way to, what is an agreeable way of referring to his work. So saying, I will come to you to have a discussion, or an invitation card like Wednesday at 6 o'clock there and there. There will be a discussion. And certificates, like there was a discussion with person X on that date. Those textual references to his work were agreeable for him to publish. And that's how his work, was put into exhibitions. I think for the catalogue, I sent out questionnaires for people who attended over the years the discussions for their memories, and I think the response by Lawrence Whedon was very precise. It's not only the words, it's just what there was, and what there was is people coming together, energy, discussion, transfer of ideas. So it's more than just exchanging words. It's about the whole thing that happens in a moment. The next artist I research is Franz Erhard Walter. He was invited to the museum in 1972, and the director at the time made a lot of efforts to work with him and display his work in the best way possible. And the key point for Walter was the mediation, and they prepared it very well. But afterwards, when the work was acquired, the next director came in, and he had a totally different view on performance art and the social aspects of his type of art, or how he saw it. And he only presented the work as an object. And by an object, he would refer to the activation. For Walter, it was important that the work is executed. And words, our language, is his modeling clay to circumscribe what happens in the work action. The institutions usually or put on a display objects. Some would be activated, but the ones that should be used outside or for a longer period of time within the museum, those works were not activated, and he found that problematic. So just by displaying the object and putting photos on the walls makes the work too simplistic. And as the work was not activated in our museum since the 70s, all the knowledge that was once there was gone. And at some point we presented the work as a storage form, and that was the way Walter at some points stopped activating the work himself. It was in the 70s, and he was kind of disillusioned. It did not have the effect that he wanted, or the ideas he had did not work, and it acquired a lot of energy from him, transferring his ideas and getting people in motion to take over from him. Also, when a work like this comes into the collection, the conservation team would like to keep it as best as possible, and within a museum collection, it becomes an object that's valuable. and what the work is about, the experience, is being overlooked. So at some point he was offended that the work was not activated. They put up photographs that did not represent his work. And there was not any mediation on the floor. So he said, just because in a museum this is how it currently is, I cannot make work tailored to the museum. And he decided to not activate it anymore and create this storage form of the work. And this storage form could also be seen as his institutional critique on the art world and his work. Both artists, Wilson and Walter, have a duality with the documentation of their work and the mediation. And that's the part I want to introduce into the conversation, the point of view of the artist being confronted with an institution.
Well, I think we learned already a lot with these introductions, which thank you for that. But indeed, let's continue with the point of view from the artist. So I would like to return to Otobong, because you just said your performance pieces were kind of the incentive to start about this idea of archiving it and archiving your performances. So you reached out to Muka with this question. And yeah, you said yourself you wanted to talk a bit more about this, so this is your chance. Can you tell us maybe a bit more about your intentions behind this question, how it relates to the performance pieces? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think one of the questions was to understand how a work can have a life, even within the spaces that are enclosed, and how, because I was looking at the works, for example, the happenings of Alan Capro as one of the thinking processes, because I reenacted one of his pieces called Baggage. And when he did that piece, he did it in Houston with his students, and they carried sand from the beach through, in the train, and then took it to the sea or to the shore and poured out the sand, collected sand from there and sent it back by UPS back to them. But for me, it was interesting to also think about the piece in a way that also connects locality, connects different geographical spaces. And with that, you start reflecting on what the score is and what the emotion is and what all the other parts that are not transcribed and cannot be transcribed. All the kinds of accidents, the failures, the relation to the day, the temperature, all those things that are so, that are not tangible. And so for me, it was interesting to start thinking, how does a museum collect a work when there are all these other aspects to it, and what happens to, and how come there isn't a hierarchy of what is collected? And so it brought me to many thoughts of imagining that the same piece, since I don't want to sell it, I don't want it to enter into, it doesn't have to have one collection. And I also think of a place of where I come from, where my family comes from, and how that, how the work can actually split into multiple places. So for me, it was interesting to think, like, how would the museum collect this work? And maybe this work can also be collected in my village, but not the same way. And it can be handed over to someone else. So it was looking at this kind of split situation of handing over a part of the work that is very much linked to the way that the structures would archive, will bring it in, and maybe will enact it. But I imagined if it was in my hometown somewhere in Nigeria, how would diaspora be performed? And how would that enter into the context of a yearly event or a ritual that could take place? But at the same time, I really was talking about the breathability of the work and how a work can actually breathe within the archive. So not just it being locked up in a place, but I was interested in that idea of capro, of something that whoever takes up the score can then work with the technologies of today, or work with the emotions, work with the political, the social climate, the ecological climate of the day. So that meant that one had to start thinking about what is it that is actually collected. Is it the tangible form? Is it the oral histories that have been transmitted? Is it the parts that are not necessarily tangible? I think when you talk about Walter folding and completely designing the way he will archive, instead of the performance itself, but the residues or the remains of that, is quite interesting, because he completely eliminates that other part that I'm interested in, which is the emotion, which is the thing that is not tangible, and what do you transmit to another body, from my body to your body. Meanwhile, I have a different temperament, and then you have to take it over. And how does that, where's that transition or that space in between? And that's what I was very much interested in discussing and in thinking through. But I think I will go back maybe to talk about diaspora, because I mentioned something about that and how that has shifted over time to a point that I'm like, well, maybe this performance is not meant to be performed anymore. With last year, in 2020, when the performance was done at Groper's Bow, we had 15 women performing the piece. And it's always the same arrangement, 5 by 5 meters, the floor piece. But at this time, with all the heightened state of the world and how things were with the coronavirus, with also the uprisings and seeing the inequalities that were going on, the piece became a piece that was then worked with the performers to then discuss and instigate the institution. And so that was where I was in the middle, trying to see, is this piece something that will then become used as a political tool, or is it something to retract away from that political, that instrumentalization? And so it became a bit complicated, and at the end of the day, I decided the piece is meant to be a piece that talks about a celebration and the poetics of it, but not a kind of piece that would be used as a political instrument within an institution. Which was a very, I can't go into details, but it's just as one gets to realize how a performance or a work can slip and shift over time due to the context or the times that it is in. And that was all of a sudden a very, an eye-opener to realize that the work can have something that I did not intend it to have. And I decided that I needed time to retract it out of a performing space to be able to think through again what that work should be and how it can be, and how that aspect, either it comes into it or either, how would it evolve actually? And so for me, that's the part that I find quite interesting with seeing how the work evolves, and especially as we are going through different kinds of shifts and accelerated shifts and accelerated temperaments, and also clashes of different kinds of temperaments, climate, emotions, many things that we're going through. How does the work shift, and can it shift? And if it's within a collection that is so stagnant, because most times when you look at the way works are being preserved, even sometimes when I'm installing my work, I cannot touch my work anymore, which is a very strange thing. I had my solo show in Chicago and I couldn't touch any of my works, and I had to stand and watch the registrar and the curator and the handlers install it, and they're like, sorry, you can't touch that. So that's not even a performance, but it's just, and I'm not yet dead, but you cannot, but you cannot even install your work, and you just have to inform, and it's really frustrating because the body is really physical. You know the work so well, and when you were doing it in your studio, you were stepping on it, and it was, you played with it, it's a mess. And once it leaves and enters into a collection, it becomes so frustrating that the body is totally disconnected from it. So then what happens to the performance or to the archive of a material, and how does the body still connect with it when it's so disconnected in a way? I decided not to do a PowerPoint. I decided that I would just talk about it. But one thing I wanted to add before I go was that something that marked me very strongly when I was studying in Nigeria was the Yoruba Brazilian houses. And I had a teacher called Abbemuseum, and he would show us the buildings that were built in Ife, and Ife is the cradle of Yoruba culture, Yoruba religion, and Yoruba mythology. And we would go around the orishas, the temples, where the gods, where you'd do sacrifices, where you'd have prayers, and we would visit. And he showed us specific things that were made by Brazilian Yoruba people. And that was around 1997. And later on in my life, I went to Brazil, and I went to Ouro Preto. And I was in Ouro Preto, and all of a sudden, I was standing on these pebbles, and it felt like it was a complete flashback. It was the way the pebbles were arranged the same way as what was in Ife in Nigeria. And what was interesting to me was that it was in two locations. The knowledge taken from the African side into Brazil, and then influenced by the Portuguese, and then brought back to Nigeria, you could see that the way of arranging that gesture was exactly, well, more or less the same thing, but in two different locations. And for me, that's something that has always marked me in the way of transmission, and that transmission and the performance of that, and how that slips into many places without us realizing it. And so for me, that was one of the things I was thinking of in relation to this performance. How can it be breathable? That it can not only stay within the context of a restrained zone, but can one actually split it to become a rhizomic kind of way of archiving, and also a way of living and expanding knowledge that is not constrained within a box. Yeah, sure.
The two things, one thing is the embodied knowledge, which is very difficult to teach and take over. Like with Walter, you don't know anything about the work if you have not activated, worked with it, spent time with it. And in the museum, we've lost that embodied knowledge, and it's very difficult to get it back. That takes time, and also exhibitions are like moments, and there's no continuation. That's the problem. There's no continuation to keep that alive and transfer it to somebody else. It's always one instant in 10 years, or that's one response. I'm curious how you deal with this when you give your work to a collection. Who takes over the responsibility? The other thing is, you said about your work, you don't want it to be misused, politically misused. Or how do you control that, as your work can be put into an exhibition with a theme or an approach or perspective that you don't feel comfortable with? Just one thing is that we have an artist who really made an agreement that we always consult him if we want to show his work.
Okay. I think the aspect of understanding what the power of the work is one of it, I think. And I haven't yet found a solution to some of the questions that you've asked, but I think one of it was also to be able to find places and engage with places and people that the work in which the work can enter into. So one of the things I was thinking of, in which it will take time to do it, and maybe when I'm a bit older, would be to be able to insert it within the place that already has that kind of embodiment and knowledge of how something can then become an event, can then become a ritual, can then become part of a constellation of a place. But it means a lot of work to bring it into that place for it to be an annual event or a monthly event, and so the performance leaves the place of the art institution, but becomes part of a lifestyle. And so that was one of the things I was thinking. So if I think of that in relation to, let's say, the project I'm working on, which is Carve to Flow in the foundation in Nigeria, how can a performance slide in between this project and become, so you don't even call it a performance, you don't call it that anymore, it just becomes life. And so that was one of the things I was thinking of. But at the same time, when you're within a place like here in Europe, working in institutions, the way of thinking would be more or less a much more, how do you say, material-based way of archiving, that you actually have photographs of it, that you have interviews, that you have. So it's a completely different way of thinking of that archive. But it allows you to be able to split it into multiple places, and there is not really one ownership, and it becomes owned by different people in different ways. And for me, that's what I think that could be much more interesting than a one system way of archiving, but it's entering many other registers. And so that's where I'm going at. That's what I'm thinking. But I'm also interested in the museum structure, but I'm also interested in other structures and see how can this work split into many ways of existence. Which makes it even more blurry and more complicated, but that's fine, it's okay. Then the other question you asked was the political instrumental. Well, that one, there's always an agenda. There's always an agenda, but sometimes when you can actually protect the work and protect what it can be used for, then you have to do it. But most times, sometimes we don't even see it. So this was the first time it was so blatant with that work that it can actually go to the other side. And for me, that raised a lot of questions on how there's not much I can control, actually, but I know that what I did was to take it out of the possibility of it being performed and enacted. And that's the only control I have, that I can take it away when I need to, and I can decide that it should not exist anymore, or it should exist in this other form. That's the only place that I have control. The rest, I don't see. I mean, if one is not there anymore, then these are other registers that can be discussed with, let's say, a foundation, with a lawyer, there are all these other people that can register it. But that's, yeah. Should I ask a question?
I really love this attitude in which the collection and archiving is challenged by such a question which you put, how to make collection with performances that are still live performances, or how to make the work which is collected breathing. And I think this also shows that, because first of all, it challenges the collection and the notion of collection. Yes, what does it mean that we have collection? And I think at the moment, especially in Europe, there really this idea of collection. This is very stone, which we a bit need to break with putting this a bit maybe sometimes crazy question, or crazy challenges to the collection. Yes, because at the moment it's the way we see and think about the collection. Really, there is this big gap between, it seems impossible. Yes, those are these impossible questions, or impossible visions of the collection. I think this is extremely interesting. And when I think about very different ways of collecting, I think that in dance dance has this a bit different attitude and ideas how to collect through the body as the archive, how you can embody things like how the work can be collected through the body of another dancer. That this is something that I think is very inspiring when we in this discussion about the collections in the museum. Yes, that maybe we just need to imagine it in a completely different way to be able to find any solution.
I had a question because you said something about the GIF.
Yes.
Yes, and that was quite intriguing to me because I did not understand it. So, because when you talk about embodiment, I think, then from what I understood, it seemed like the GIF was that possibility of embodying an action and repeating it for the body to become, for it to become knowledge, that the body knows, the knowing of the body. Oh, I don't know if I understood it properly.
No, here I think in case of this GIF, it was a decision of the artist to represent performance as a GIF, as a very in fact one image which a bit maybe what it embodied. Of course, there is some idea of that, or maybe even representation, that it's. It somehow represent the energy of the performance. Yes, because maybe sometimes we don't need to represent, the whole structure of the performance. Here she decided, no, I want to make this very short GIF, and this, in a way, this transmits the energy which was in the performance. Yes, so it comes a bit from very different idea. What we should in fact archive when we decide to archive performance.
So I was thinking maybe it is the museum that has to change, no? Because I think maybe it already has changed from this more static space to a space of events, maybe, like more dynamic. I think maybe Agnieszka, this is also what you do with your exhibitions, because you really stage these performances, and maybe the museum space transforms in a kind of stage, I feel like, or am I wrong with that?
No, of course, like this performative turn, it's something that is happening for like over like some years in many museums around the world, which open to or like even like reopen to for performative events. Or I would even say that there was a sort of fashion that it was already in this high wave, and now a bit also after COVID we don't like. I think it's a bit this. Sort of fashion, it's a bit over. However, it's now, I think, entering a new moment, which I think, like when I went now for the Venice Biennale, that was something that really interested me, because in last, I know how many editions of the Venice Biennale were strongly dominated by like this performative exhibitions, or then performative artists were like getting the this Venice Lions. I was very interested to see like what is happening, and I would call it a bit like it's still very present in a Biennale, but of course there is not so much. I think we are now entering a bit like a different phase of this phenomenon of like performing arts being so having such a strong presence in museums, which like there are some institutions, and as like the one I used to work in, Ujazdowski Castle, there was this big tradition of different mediums working together, or always this dialogue between performing arts and visual art, which was based in the figure of the first director of the institution, who was in fact the artist by himself and the leader of one of the most important Polish experimental performance groups, Akademia Ruchu, Academy of Movement. So this thinking was always in the institution, but of course many institutions just like opened first time to have this experience, and this great like also challenge to have like performances, dance in the museum, in the exhibition space, to really like make it not in a black box, but yeah, to have not really exhibition, but a performance and an event. But I don't know what is like your vision of what will happen with.
I like your idea of sort of like embed your work in the place where you create the work or develop the work, and invest time in the people. It's like you create ambassadors for your work, and because they are so involved in your work, by making ambassadors, you create also a sort of responsibility and a connection to the work. So it lives on beyond the system of the institution. There are other people outside involved and connected and feel responsibility. So I thought it's a nice idea to take home.
You talked about you mean the possibilities, you mean in relation to performance post-COVID, We're not yet post, we're still in it, no? I think I think it will still go on. I mean, there will still be. It's just that we will take more measures of trying to protect ourselves. But I don't know. I mean, I asked that question during COVID time, how I would continue having the conversational performances that I do. Or, I mean, we're very lucky that we were able to do things like in 2017 with Castle, or all the different places that you were able to do performances. But now I'm really, and then I'm really reflecting. In 2018, I started thinking of making carpet pieces where people could lie and touch objects and connect and like breathe in like clean air and things like that. And then COVID happened, and then the carpets are there and there'll be nobody on it. So I think it's just a question of being patient, and sometimes the answer is not, for me, I don't have the answer yet, but I feel that I still will make the work that will need bodies on it and will need people to engage in it. And sometimes they just have to be dormant until it's the right time to see it in action. So I just feel that with the kinds of events that are taking place, that I can make a work that is in dormancy, that is sleeping, but can still be displayed. It's a bit like Walter. I think what he did was to create a dormant work, but within that work, it's like it's sleeping. But at one point in time, what if someone opens it up and wears it and everything? But I think works in dormancy is kind of interesting during this time. But it still has a certain kind of power that even though it's not enacted, you can use other senses, you can wake up other senses that wake up the body. So the dormancy is just the part where the body is not in action, but what I'm interested in doing is to trigger the other senses that make you feel alive. So it's a different way of like thinking of the performance, but much more sensual, much more entering the places of breathing, of senses, of the goosebumps, and it will take over you without you knowing it.
So you said the body is very important, and also I think with Chantal, with your research to Ian Wilson, this is also like a very important element. And also, yeah, the senses. I was wondering, maybe to Chantal as well, do you have like some practical strategies that you use to like register these kind of elements?
I think the most effective tool that we use is the artist interview to get all that knowledge and and discuss the future of the work and the possibilities of activating it. And yeah, I think the artist interview is, I think, the most effective of all the tools that we now at the moment have. But I like the idea of ambassadors.
And Otobong, do you also feel like the artist interview is an effective way of keeping these performances alive in a way in the archive?
It's one of the ways, but I know that there's some interviews I've done where I contradict myself, so. So I'll say this today and tomorrow it's something else. But that means that it has to be a continuous thing. It has to be something that, you know, you start with, I bet the conversation I had with Lotte, because Lotte, we've been having we had long conversations about this, and I bet if you ask me today, especially after different events that has happened over time, I might not be able to talk to you about the work the same way as I did like 3 years ago. So I think one of the main things are about continuity. And a lot of times we have one interview and then we take that as the interview, especially if the interview was really good. But the person evolves, and it's just like, I mean, I take very much like my female body, which when I was 20, it was different. When I had to change my food, when I was 30, then now I'm 40, and certain things that I used to love, I have to let them go with lots of pain. And then I'm going towards my 50s, and then, it's a different point of view. I have a different urgencies and also see the world in a different way. So whatever I said when I was 28 might be rubbish now. So I'm not, the interviews and all that are interesting and are important, but I think the continuity and the way of seeing the evolution and the way of thinking is also important, because ideologies change. Some people might be much more right-wing today than they were a few years ago, and some more extreme left in their way of thinking. And it's through those experiences in life that it changes your point of view and your way of being in the world. But I think that interviews are important, but then they can also be contradictory in a way. I don't know how you feel about that one.
I can maybe a bit tell about it from the other angle. So as somebody who when makes any sort of more maybe academic even research, of course this is extremely important tool, and it's very important that they are there. That artists change the mind, then. Yeah, this is the risk of this medium, but still I believe it's worth to make it. In general, to make this, use as many different possibilities we have. Yes, even exactly to maybe this way to a bit catch this situation, but by trying to a bit get it from many perspectives. But still, it's as we all the time addressing a bit impossible. Then we just need to live with this, that it's, we cannot have everything, but still we want to do something about it, yes? So yes, in this way I believe it's important, it makes sense.
My points. What's this? Yes, that was it. You talked about your ideas on your own work evolve as one does. Everyone does. Looking back on your life, our lives. I know I experienced when we have acquired a work at a certain time and the artist comes back to us with an additional way of displaying the work. There is it requires a flexibility of the team and of the curator or the head of collections. Sometimes the response is, well, we acquired it in this format, and this is how we are going to present it. it requires also a type of flexibility of thinking along with the artist and keep developing as well with the artist. And maybe artists should be then every so years approach to respond on their past work.
I think maybe this is a good moment to hear from the public. So there is some time for questions. So I would say if someone has a question, this is the moment.
Yeah, I have a question. Because Agnieszka, you mentioned that the notion of labor is not important in the context of this conference. Somehow when you are talking...
The notion of what?
Labor. Like work you need to put into
Yes.
creating performance. You said it in the context of Laura Lima exhibition, but I think in fact this notion of labor is very important to sustain the performance collection and to create these works. And it's different kind of labor we need to put into preservation of objects, actually. It's very different methodology. So I wanted to ask you about this because I think three of you have very different experience in this context. So I thought it would be interesting maybe to touch this subject.
Does it work? Yeah, okay. I think like what performance, and when we talk about any sort of, like we really address this idea of having live performance in the collection, it's, or in general, having even performance in the museums, it really like opens this issue of care and that you don't deal with the objects, yes, but you deal with people, and this in a way changes everything at once, like changes the whole institution, because it makes you think about those everyday needs. It's about this, I know, that you need to wash performers' clothes, yes, which, for example, like museum just doesn't have any facilities to do it. So I think this is like extremely interesting exercise. And when you have people in the exhibition, like for example, for half a year, as it was in Laura Lima, it's really, it even brings the curators to be in the exhibition like almost every day, because you just feel responsible. So this notion like of care, responsibility, like really starts a bit also, I really believe, start to change the institution by itself from inside. When you start to have like really people inside, because it's not only about, I know, like me as a curator, but it's about every people who are like there at place. Yes, and you have also new people, those performers who just start to, in a way, live there. Yes, they start to be part of this institution with their ideas, their energy, also their problems that they bring into the institution. And I think it really has this very strong transformative energy.
Otobong, you want to maybe answer about this?
I have one question. Is there an active or a passive role for a collector?
Active or passive role for a collector?
For a collector, yes.
You can never be passive unless you put things in the storage and lock them up. But even then, the work is still doing something in the store. But I don't think it's a passive role being a collector. One has to take care of the works that are being acquired, even though you also have collectors that buy to speculate, and to make money and all that, only that. But you also have those that acquire. But I think as a collector, it's not a passive thing. There is an emotional investment. There is, hopefully, there is the love for the work. There's also the support, hopefully, to the institution or the artist. So it's not a passive thing, not at all. That's my own opinion, but yeah, that's what I think. What do you?
Yeah, I want to ask a very basic question. I mean, what really comes to the fore from, or what is really being stressed in a way, is the inability of the museum to hold performance or to hold dance or to present it. I mean, you were talking about the difficulties that you had in trying to make an exhibition out of dance and being challenged. This is really doing like a feedback sound, right? It should go away. Sorry for it. Sorry? Okay. So you were talking about the difficulties you had in trying to present dance. Otobong, you are talking about how the museum is in fact not really able to accommodate your work in such a way that they can continue to breathe. You were also talking about working with artists who were dissatisfied in a way with how the work was being presented. So my basic question would be like, why in fact would we want to bring performance or dance into the museum when it is actually not equipped for that? I mean, or to put it more positively, what does the museum have to offer to performance or dance that we should continue to try to bring it into it?
I think, first of all, that artists want to enter museum, and that's, I would say, like the most important. And then museums need to open, and then, you know, it doesn't mean that it doesn't need then like additional work from the institution, but I think that we should not be like restraint or like the blockade. But I really believe like that this comes from the artists. Yes, it's like the artists want to enter museum. They are like knocking, especially like dancers performances. They start to like create this work and propose it as a work. That's how I really like believe this whole like phenomenon. That's the way the practices develop, through like really like the power coming from the artist.
I'm not sure it's always maybe from the artist, because you're being asked sometimes, we would like to have this work, or we would like to, and then you really have to sit down and think about if that work should go here or there. I mean, like even with the galleries, my galleries are like, yeah, you know, how are we going to put out this performance? And I'm like, well, I don't see how, you know. But I think for me, it's a question of, it's where can the work where can the work be kept for, I see it more as an educational thing, more or less, that the museum can have something or can keep something, try to keep something that can be used or can be looked at and can be seen in the future. So it's really trying to understand what can actually enter this place and how can this work find a way of existence for the future. And I think by knocking on that door, you start also understanding the structure, the design of a museum. And the design of the museum was not necessarily meant to keep something alive. It was meant to take things and try to keep them in the same state and to reduce the oxidation and the kind of other external factors that will age the object or would age the thing. But for me, it's interesting to see, instead of trying to stifle or to cut the breath, how can you actually add more oxygen to it? Even though by design, it's not meant to function that way. And I think for me, everything is a question of design, law, the laws that have been put in place, the design of things, and that design, how it infiltrates into places. So for me, it comes from the place of also like the colonial kind of like structure of like the movement of people within different parts of the world, and trying to bring back that glass case with plant and keep it in a controlled temperature, the biosphere, and then the terranium is brought in and then transferred again, so it's not polluted by any other thing, so that you can keep it in its original state of where you took it from. And that design has infiltrated into many other structures, and from ethnographic museums into contemporary museums today that collect works.
Okay, I have 2 questions here. I'm just gonna give it to you first. And then...
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for a very nice conversation. I wanted to comment on something that Otobong said, because I work with Chantal in the Van Abbemuseum, and it's about this moment of, let's say, contradicting yourself as an artist in the artist interview or later, which is something that I've been thinking about a bit last time, because it seems always that that is kind of a mistake, that somehow contradiction should not happen, and that somehow, let's say, the artist should somehow speak the truth about the work at the moment of inception, and then that truth should always continue in that way. Whereas maybe if we stop thinking about this, let's say, this preservation mode that kind of fixes a thing in one point in time and says, well, this is what it is, but more accept the idea that the artwork itself is a living, breathing thing and needs a life. And in life, you change, you evolve, you contradict yourself. That maybe in our, let's say, method of preservation, we should not be afraid so much about contradiction in that sense, but see it as an interesting point of, let's say, transformation or evolution in a work. Because I remember that I did an artist interview once with an artist reflecting on a project that happened in '69, and the artist was convinced that it happened in a completely different moment in time than it actually happened. It was a mistake. But I was thinking about that later, but he lived his entire life after that thinking that this was the case, and he built his career kind of with that other idea of time. So in a way, that was his reality, and it was like a parallel reality that was created into his own, let's say, the living memory of what happens in your life. And I thought, yeah, maybe instead of thinking, well, okay, that was a mistake that we can correct, we said, no, here something was created, and something we should, allow and document and reflect upon. So it's not really a question in that sense, but it's more like, how would you feel about this? Let's say that when the moment of acquisition is not so much the moment of freezing, but is the beginning of a relationship in which we all accept that we will all change and that we need to stay in touch in this process of change in that sense.
Okay, we thought you want to collect
maybe you
questions.
first answer.
No, but that was the question.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that is wishful, for me, that's always been a wishful thinking that can happen. But there are many other factors that come to destroy that beautiful image of the possibility of the work evolving and having that transformative place, because one is economy, and I think if one puts money and buys the work, most times, especially as an institution, it was state money, private money, whatever money, it comes with specific kinds of fear that once it's destroyed or the work is disintegrating, that is a big problem. So there is that issue that is linked with that space of economy. So, for example, if I say that I'm happy to give my work, let's say my performance to Muka, I don't want money. So that at least I hope that the work can, it doesn't, but the thing is that that's something to discuss and to negotiate with the institution, that you can come in and out of the archive, hopefully, and continue a dialogue with the possibility of having other kinds of, approaches and other kinds of, that you can actually change your mind. But the thing is that with work, for me, the way I work, some works that I did 10 years ago, I'm beginning to understand them now. I understood them up to a certain point, but by making other works, meeting other people, having different encounters in different places, the work then becomes even more comprehensible to me. So certain things that one might have thought was the work actually is not. It becomes something else over time. So, and I think these are the kinds of rectifications that can take place within, if you have that access to the archive and to the institution. But another thing that I would say that that affects it is also that the people that work in institutions, the directors, 4 years, they're gone. And most times the new person comes in with a complete different approach. And the political climate also demands also different kinds of approaches. So sometimes that continuity becomes truncated. I remember when I was working with the Weltkulturmuseum in Frankfurt with Clémentine Delis, the idea was every year I would come in and follow the think tank and also look into the collection, and we would have a whole group of people, from lawyers to patent makers to people really reflecting on the collection, coming in and sitting down for a week to talk about specific works. And for me, that was extremely enlightening. But when the director left, everything changed. And that continuity that I had for 5 years ended with the leaving of that person. So, and then you had a new policy, new approach to the collection, new ways of working. So it's a lot of many elements that make it very difficult to have that continuity, unless as an artist, one considers in the contract that you make right from the beginning that you state that you want to work all your life with that institution, and if it's signed and agreed, then you know that no matter who's changing or going through that institution, you will always have a relationship. So it's something that you learn along the line, what you're going to put in the contracts, how you're going to change the laws to make sure that the work, or you have that consistency with an institution.
Hi, thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. It's very enlightening on many levels, I think. I'd like to take a little bit step back to the beginning in a way, and I'm quite curious indeed to hear a little bit more about the documentation practices that you talked about, Agnieszka, and potentially also the idea of the best way possible that was mentioned by Chantal. I'm really intrigued in knowing a little bit more about the status of these documentations. Are they just for presentation, and then where do they end up? Are they part of the collection, part of the work? Are they the work? How do you view those different levels in a way of engagement with the work?
I noticed when researching Frans Aert Walter's work that the documentation is spread all over the library archives. We have different archives, and lots of the documentation was overlooked. And I think the book they made in '72 looked like an artist object with a canvas sleeve. So it was easily overlooked as while it actually is quite a detailed report of how everything was organized and very insightful. But yeah, with documentation, it's very easily misunderstood.
Like my experience, which I showed like in this presentation, it's related to trying to archive very contemporary practices, very fresh practices, in fact, to something that is almost like happening with all the risk. What does it mean? So this was like very aware gesture, but also a way to use the exhibition, the institution, to put also some practices which are very, I really believe were very like important, but they were in a niche a bit. Yeah, many of them were happening like in grassrooted institutions or like non-profit sometimes places. So that was in a way to put them in the exhibition with like all the status, and a bit like use also the status of the exhibition to also make this gesture of it, also writing a history. So, so I think that's quite important to say that it was really something very contemporary. We tried to catch it, and what has happened with, like, for sure, none of this. Works ended up in collection at the time. What was bought in a collection from this exhibition was a registration of one of the actions of Academy of Movement and an object by Aneta Grzeszykowska. But I know that artists by themselves work further now with those materials which we generated for the exhibition. But of course, at the time, the thinking about what will happen in the future for sure was not present at the moment when we were like working on the exhibitions. I think it went in a very different way, depending a bit also on the artist.
I think. One should acknowledge that knowledge is not only in at the head of the director, the curator, or in the documents. It's within the whole institution. So, and I think especially for work with the performative aspect, you really need to work together with mediation, education, the different departments. I think it's a nice opportunity to work together as an institute, with everyone's different aspects of knowledge combined.
Are there some more questions? Yes.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the discussion. It's very inspiring. I'm wondering if aren't we putting a lot of responsibility on the artwork itself, like as if archiving would depend only on the artwork, or maybe in the institution as well. Like, I wonder if is it possible to extend this responsibility to the environment you were talking about? No, when you're creating an art piece, like how can we share the responsibility of archiving the value of this artwork with the society? I know this is the role of the museum, and of course there's a pedagogical function, but I don't know, perhaps it's also interesting from the artists, like this engagement of society as a tool to protect the artwork and not leave everything on the hands of the museum, because then it becomes very vulnerable, no? Like when the direction changes, when the political environment changes, like, and becomes very fragile, then I wonder if the museum also has this focus on society. I don't know.
I'm sorry, I need to think. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I think that the museum is just one of the places of care and where the work can be installed in, taken care of, locked, or whatever it does. But if we have to think of a broader picture, and it also depends on the work, I think, also the kinds of works that are being made. We also see that there are many other kinds of works where the museum is not the place where the museum is not the place that holds the work or takes care of the work. And I think when you see the ranges of, like, from social practices, for example, I would give an example like Rick Lowe, Project Row Houses, Houston, Texas, where there are 22 row houses in which he acquired through the gifts from different people. And there, the way the work is not something that is contained as an object. The object is the house, but it's the knowledge that is transmitted from one generation to the next, the care that is taken of the women, single mothers, the after-school programs, the artists that come to work and transmit knowledge. So actually, the archive is not actually a tangible thing, but it's the thing that is flowing like a fluid that you're inserting in the lives of young kids, that you're investing in the life of a young mother, that will continue talking about art and transmitting that knowledge. So when we're looking at different practices, or even when we think of indigenous knowledges, we also realize that you don't necessarily need the object. You don't necessarily need to care for that object. The object can be buried and put back into the soil to generate, again, a new life. But what is transmitted is something beyond the object. So if you're looking at all these multiple possibilities of archiving, of transmission, and of knowing, and of knowledge, then you realize that the museum is just one of that possibility within a society that has given the power to the museum to take care of objects. But in other places, the way of taking care and transmitting, and who has the power to do that, could be in a body, could be in an animal, could be in a tree, could be with people, could be with a whole community, could be in the air. So you're not looking at it from a single perspective, but you're looking at it from all this other perspective that are archiving our lives.
There was also a question from someone else in the back, I think. Yes, maybe this is our last question. I must say, I have no idea how to get this microphone to you. Wait.
Yeah, thank you so much for the discussion. Maybe two comments. One comment about the desire of the artist to be in the museum. I think it's a different desire, or I want to put a question there. I mean, I think it's obvious why we want to perform in the museum, because it's another stage. But the question that I have is, do we want to enter into the archive? And it's a different gesture in a sense. And I think you're already kind of addressing these problematics, because the museums were also kind of, let's say, they had a very strong role in the preservation of stolen arts and stolen objects, and they are sitting in the core of the colonial project. So I think we should further reflect on this gesture of us wanting to participate in that kind of institution. This is kind of an open question towards, do we want to enter into the archive, and how do we want to enter there?
Perhaps I would like to make a little distinction, because museums are really important problematics. They are deeply linked to the colonial system. But there is a strange beast that is called contemporary art museums. And perhaps we should, in a certain way, not change the laws, but reflect on the Constitution. And then for these contemporary art museums, a lot of them, I mean, essentially they have been a spin-off, because to find another capacity. And their constituent moments, if you think about them, Moderna Museet, it is the giant of Niki de Saint-Phalle. You are working in a museum, Van Abbemuseum, where there once was an exhibition, The Street. No? All of this, Centre Pompidou has a really kind of performative aspiration at the outset also. And I wonder, Otobong, whether, if we come back to Yoruba thinking, whether the notion of Ashe, of the energy of the gods, that's of Olodumare, but also of the Orishas, but also of us human beings, the energy to let things happen. I think that was at the origin of the constitution of contemporary art museums. So if we now do not succeed in making a difference and in believing that there may be a space where it is about letting things happen, you know, the energy of letting things continue to happen, which I think is not only in performances, which can be killed just as well as other things, but in like all the works of contemporary artists. So if we can't make the whole museum performative, perhaps we should end it. So or we have to go for it and say there's a space there of capacity, or we should say, like, let it become part of the big bulk. I think that's might be an important distinction to continue on your Yoruba thinking.
Continue? Okay, one question. Okay, the thing is, I think it's a question of time. We want things very quickly and very fast, right? And so we want the change to happen like now, like the museum should let go, and you know. But it's slowly happening. It's just that we are not seeing, it's not fast enough for us. And I think in our lifetime, things have evolved. If I think in the 80s, what the museum was like in the 80s, and I look at it in the 90s, how it started slowly shifting, and I look at it in 2000, and now we're in 2020s. It's slow, but I think a lot of things have happened, but we're not even acknowledging that that has happened. And we're also seeing that other places are also opening up in different ways. So if we think of the church, and we had like Protestants, we had all this, it broke out from a place that was a resistance to. And I feel that in this way, like the contemporary art museums and things like that will have to evolve. They have no choice anyway, because of just the way things are. And some institutions are able to have works that they allow to decay, because it's part of the process, that they allow to breathe, that they allow for the work to be dormant and then comes out at a certain time and have a life. So I think that this way of thinking is gradually entering into the process of the museum, and also they're reflecting on ways in which certain works can come into it. Not all museums. Many museums are still in its, but some are. And those that are, we really have to look and to also connect with them to be able to understand how to work with them, I feel. Did I answer your question? Oh, it wasn't a question.
Okay, I think this is a good moment to end the discussion. Thank you to the public for the very interesting questions, and of course, thank you a lot for these wonderful individuals who had a very interesting talk. So, yeah.